Heather, rough week all around in many respects. Um, I don't know. There are some things that are reminiscent of like the Iraq War days, but also in many ways very very different. It feels like. Just I don't know. Just give me your broad thoughts before we talk about sort of like the domestic implications of this stuff.
Well, specifically about the horror show that's taking place in the Middle East right now. It's really, I mean, I am no expert on this particular subject, even though, but like everybody else, I've been following it for many, many years. But it's so complicated, and this recent events are so horrifying that it's really hard for me to wrap my mind around it. I'm just kind of overwhelmed. And I think that I'm not alone in this. A lot of people that I talk to, this is one of those issues that is so difficult, so, morally charged and yet complicated on so many different levels that it's really, really difficult. I just briefly, touching on the American response to the whole thing. I mean, this is just my personal view. I felt like, in the beginning, I was a little disappointed in the Biden administration and the president specifically being so bellicose. My belief is when these situations happen that cool heads have to prevail. It's always a mistake to just let your emotions run and to sort of give license to that when you're in a position of power. And I saw people like Marco Rubio on TV, going on in ways that sounded almost genocidal as far as I was concerned toward the Palestinians. And yet you see this, the horrors of what happened in the terrorist attack. It's difficult not to feel emotional and try to, find some way to express your complete and utter, horror. But last night's speech, I thought, by Biden, had a couple of really good things going for it. I think that he has, in the past few days, tempered some of that bellicosity and has been much more statesmanlike in terms of how he's approached the issue, that he has been, the fact that he's been acknowledging the Palestinian, state right to statehood and, expressing a lot of sympathy for their plight as well as what happened in Israel. I think that's very good. And I think that in his speech, when he, denounced Islamophobia and anti-Semitism in equal measure, I think that that's very important, something that any president should do. And I shudder to think what would have been said if Donald Trump were in office right now. But I don't really get the equivalent of Ukraine and what's happening in Israel. I don't understand. I get it in terms of his domestic priority of trying to get both of those things funded. And I can see each of them having the merited argument, but trying to use them as an equivalence in the situation just doesn't make any sense to me.
It's the opposite. It's the opposite. I mean, the Ukraine is the victim of Russian aggression and occupation, and Palestine and the West Bank and Gaza, here. But Palestinians more broadly are the victims of the occupation, and so that doesn't just that. I agree with you that it's good that he definitely has taken his foot off the gas slightly, but it remains incredibly frustrating to me that we're still plowing ahead with unconditional aid, given the brutality that we're seeing and the thousands of bodies that are piling up in just days with no sign of slowing down. So I'm hoping that maybe the public-facing rhetoric signals a change in tone towards Netanyahu behind the scenes, but I have no evidence to support that, given what we're seeing of State Department officials threatening or resigning, trying to express their dissent privately. I mean, that is to me the thing that remains the most concerning, because the more we kind of tread water here, the more lives are being lost.
And I got to say, I sort of had the opposite reaction with Biden. Like at first I thought, and I think it's in part sort of influenced by talking to this Israeli reporter and editor of The Call, I think it is, and 972
Local Call.
Local Call, and understanding that like the the Israeli population not supportive of Netanyahu. I think there was a poll earlier. I don't know if those numbers have held up. Like 83% wanted him to resign, but simultaneously, near unanimity amongst the Israeli population about going in and essentially leveling Gaza. And my assessment of what Biden was doing was to go in and publicly provide very supportive rhetoric, but privately, trying to sort of tone things down a little bit, sitting in on the war council meeting. That doesn't happen. And it certainly hasn't happened in the past. But then watching, Jeeps come off some type of transport plane, I'm like, well, this is the leverage here, though. I mean, it's one thing to say, I'm willing to give you the rhetoric in public. It's another to actually sort of just have free flowing weaponry come in to support this. I also think that the Biden administration in some levels, I think they're much more concerned about a regional, and by regional, I mean, I don't know that it's possible to have just a regional war there at this point, particularly, with what's going on with Russia and like this, it is, I think that there are probably far greater fears and that they may be more justified about an expanding regional and maybe even like international, broader conflict coming out of that region than we're hearing about. And I suspect that's like, part of the reason why Biden came in and was like, there's no daylight here because discouraging Iran and Hezbollah and whatnot for jumping in, because it's not hard to imagine a scenario where this thing starts to cascade.
Absolutely.
And, it's certainly within, let's say, Russia's interest to have a conflict erupt in the Middle East, because Putin does not want the level of attention that Russia, Ukraine is getting to be maintained, I would imagine. And so I think that's a real problem. And I suspect that part of the reason why Biden went in so strongly was as much about that as anything else, but I don't know. I mean, I
don't know either, but I totally agree with you. And I think that that's backed up by the fact that one of the first things that they did, that the American administration did, was send in those aircraft carriers, just sort of okay, everybody, hold your fire, because, we're going to be here if you try to do this. And I don't think there's any doubt that that is top of mind to the administration, to European leaders, to actually the whole world, in terms of trying to keep a lid on this. It's extremely volatile. I mean, there are forces at work in this that have almost very little to do with the actual plight of the Palestinians or the Israeli terrorist attack. This is a much bigger chessboard that everybody's playing on. So I mean, again, that's part of what's overwhelming about this, is that there is a sense, and I don't want to be too catastrophic in my thinking here, but there's a sense that this is a very, very, very serious moment that could fly out of control. And for someone like me, who basically I write a lot and think a lot, like we all do here, about foreign policy and national security and all that stuff. But, our focus in this country has been on our own democracy and the threats to that, and the rise of the fascist right and all of that. And then suddenly you're sort of yanked back into the reality that the world is a very big place, and there's a lot of very, very tenuous arrangements in the wake of the Cold War that are still unraveling. And we still see the remnants of that unraveling all over the place. So it's a serious moment, I think, which is one of the reasons why watching what's happening in our domestic politics is so stunningly, outrageous. that we are unable to be in our politics serious about anything anymore. I mean, Biden, you can love him or hate him, you can think he's too old, you can do whatever. He is a serious person, and his administration is taking these things seriously, and thank God for that, because if you look at what's happening elsewhere in the Congress, it's, we're dealing with a complete circus over there.